Welcome to LSC. It's Sports Time. I'm your host, Bob Hintz. Today I have Frank Edgar Jr. with me, a former basketball player at Hampton High School, but one of three generations that went to Hampton High School. Welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Glad to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about the three generations. Let's start with your daddy. Got
Certainly.
a chance to meet your daddy playing golf. Just wonderful human being.
Well, he is. He and Mom just celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary the other night.
Fantastic.
He played at Hampton High between, well, I guess late 40s, early 50s.
Right.
And instilled in me the love of the Crabbers and love of high school sports in general.
Well, you still live in basically close to where you grew up.
I'm 2 blocks away from where we grew up, over in Wythe.
Right. And what they used to call your daddy?
Feets.
Feet.
Yeah,
Good.
feet.
He's got feet. I told him one day we found a shoe laying in the parking lot. And somebody said, "Well, whose is it?" I said, "Well, look at the size. It could only be one guy."
13. That's right. Back when 13 was tremendously large.
Right.
Yes.
Now, he was basically a football player at Hampton?
Football, basketball, baseball, and tennis, from what I can
okay.
gather. And went off to college at King College in Bristol, and played, from what I understand, played a lot of basketball, played some tennis and baseball as well.
Right. Very good. And then you got coming along. Just a natural progression for you to go to Hampton High School and to play sports.
Well, it certainly was a natural progression to go to Hampton High School. Being a Crabber was important, and
right.
But yes, I was fortunate enough to go and play sports there. Played for Herman Daniel and Walter Brower.
Yeah, so we're going to date Walter real good here.
That's right, because I was on his first team in Hampton. He had been the basketball coach at Lindsay Junior High.
Right.
And he came over to coach at Hampton my first year, which 77, I guess it was. And so I had Walter Brower in his first year at Hampton High.
Well, you were then involved in the first, first win that he had.
That's right.
And now he's got
right.
over 500
I was
wins.
at his 500th, in fact.
That's just amazing for you to have that ability to be the number one in 500.
Oh, I always feel very fortunate in my life to have come across characters like Coach Brower, who is an outstanding basketball person, and to have a chance to play for him and then get to know him over the years. It's been a wonderful friendship.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about you. Then you end up going to UVA.
I did.
Didn't play any sports, stuck with your academics.
No, and Coach Brower would probably be the first one to say he didn't expect me to play at college level. That, and I played Ralph Sampson's position, and I wanted to go to Virginia, so I don't think I was going to break into the lineup there.
You don't think you're going to knock Sampson out of there?
No. He had a foot on me. So, yeah.
Well, what did you end up in as a degree?
History degree, Soviet history, which is so relevant these days after the wall fell, but Soviet history, communist takeovers was my
But when
thesis.
you graduated, you didn't go immediately to law school because you're a lawyer now, but for a few years, about 4 or 5 years, you worked construction.
I did. I had worked at Pembroke Construction Company here in Hampton during my college years, summers and winters, and then when I got out of school, I came back home and went to work for Tommy Honeycutt full time.
Well, what was that experience like? Was you able to use what you got through and not only education but your sports to help you in that at all?
I've always been able to use what I learned through sports in everything I did. Coming to Pembroke was a chance for me to grow up a little bit and to work with people like Lenny Rittenauer, who was Mr. Honeycutt's top guy. Lenny taught me a lot about business, about how to organize, about how to get projects done. I learned a great deal from Tommy Honeycutt as well, same way. That's an old business down there it's run very well from top to bottom, and I was glad to be a part of that.
Right. So what made you decide to go back and pursue the law degree?
I wanted to have a profession that I could take with me that would be my own, and law seemed to be the way to go at the time. I applied. I got into the University of Idaho College of Law in Moscow, Idaho. I had been married a year to a Newport News girl and decided at that time we would just take a flyer and go to North Idaho.
So you drove. You're talking about 3,000 miles.
We sold 2 cars, bought a Ford Bronco 2, rented a trailer from U-Haul, and Patsy and I at the time, my wife at the time, and I put our 2 cats in the back, and off we went to Moscow, Idaho.
Well, that had to be a cultural change, or an adjustment anyway, because not only the people there, but the temperatures, and you're not talking Tidewater area. You get into Idaho.
It was a wonderful experience. We landed in a town of 18,000 people, half of which were students at the university. The university was located 8 miles east of Washington State University. So you had 2 large college programs there within 8 miles of each other. So you had Pac-10 sports, you had Big Sky sports at the time with Idaho.
Right.
And the first people we met, the first Sunday we went to church there in Moscow in a small Episcopal church, we sat in front of the man whose name was on the law school. He and his wife were from Georgia. And we sat behind a young couple that had a young daughter and met them right after church. He was the head coach of the Idaho Vandal basketball program, the youngest Division I coach at the time, Kermit Davis. So we jumped right into Moscow society the first Sunday we were there.
Was you able to do anything with sports while you were out there?
Played a lot of sports. I was in a great law school class with a former tight end, All-America tight end from Boise State, John Cox, and a couple other good athletes that thought we could still play. And we did play a lot of university basketball. We played a lot of university softball. The last game we played, though, when I was 30 at the time, and we played a team that had a quarterback guy named Doug Nussmeier, who's went on to the NFL, and one of his teammates leaped over me to dunk the ball, and that was when I said, I looked down at the row of wives and children, because one of my teammates had children, and said, this may be the end for any sort of really competitive sports, but
wow,
it was a lot of fun.
Well, let's back up a little bit, because we didn't talk about the third generation, your son. You've got a son now going
I do.
to
My
Hampton.
son Jordan is a junior, just finished his junior year at Hampton High School.
And is he a baseball player? Or
He's a baseball player. He
playing
went over
for Danny Mitchell.
Danny Mitchell, who's taught him a great deal about life and about sports, but he's enjoyed playing for Coach Mitchell and learned a lot. I think we all learned a lot when we were around Danny. And Jordan's had a wonderful run. He was second team All-District this year as a designated hitter. And he also ran cross country for Hampton for 3 years, for his 8th grade year when he was running cross country, then 9th and 10th as well.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about coming back to the Tidewater. You get your degree. Was there ever any thought in your mind that you may stay out there, or did you always know I'm coming back to the Tidewater?
There was a thought about it, about staying, because I went on and clerked a year in Boise, Idaho, where we got more involved in the YMCA out there, which I've always been a part of, and with Boise State Athletics, because my friend John Cox had gone back home to Boise to set up his law practice. But I clerked for a federal judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, courts in San Francisco. His chambers were in Boise. And I had the chance to travel the West.
Wow.
And being a Ninth Circuit clerk, you get to meet a lot of lawyers from a lot of big firms, and there was a thought about staying. Unfortunately, we had a good friend of ours pass away while we were out there and could not get out of the Spokane at Washington airport. And Patsy at the time decided that she had to be within a day's drive of home. So we looked in Washington, D.C. and Charlotte and in between, but had 2 offers from here over in Norfolk, in fact, and took one of those, and I was glad we came back.
Well, we're glad you got back too. All right, now let's talk a little bit about what you're doing, because you're still involved in the sports, but you started doing stuff with Bill Nettles when he does the playoffs in football and basketball.
Well, I had been doing some Little League tournaments. I've been the announcer for the Hampton with Little League, and then for the District 7 tournament, which we host most years. This year we're hosting the 9-10 tournament starting next week. But I had started doing that and actually had met Bill Nettles. I knew who he was and met him. He's the voice of Todd Stadium and does a lot of the state tournaments. And I read an article in the paper where he had announced his 700th football game. So I wrote him a note and congratulated him, and he invited me to come up to Todd Stadium one night and sit with him, and ended up spotting for him for a couple of games, and then worked with him doing stats in the state playoffs.
Okay. Also, before I forget about it, you do some stuff with Ron Curry's tournament.
I do, and I really got going when I started working with Bill. Bill had been asked to be the main PA guy during the Curry tournament, which is the old Fort Eustis Hampton Bethel basketball tournament, now hosted at Hampton University. And Bill had invited me to come down, and I did Holland Hall, and he would do the Convocation Center down there. And we split up the duties that way. In the last couple of years, he's been doing some bigger tournaments around the country, and I've been the main PA guy for the Ronald Curry tournament, which is a great honor. I'm glad to be a part of that.
Yeah, that's just good. You get to see some awful good athletes when you're doing that, which is just unbelievable.
Well, Bob, that's what I have gotten from my father, really. I remember in the early 70s, Dad said, we're going to Williamsburg. And why? We're going to go see Ron Springs, the late Ron Springs, play football.
Right.
You have to see him now before he goes off. And we went to Lafayette High School, which at the time was quite a ride, and went to see Ron Springs. And that was kind of the beginning of him taking me to see some of these finer athletes in our area.
Right. Then we got you to do some stats with us at LSC when we do the sports over at Darling Stadium.
Well, I've always wanted to try it out and see if I could do a little announcing at that level, and was fortunate enough to hook on and do some statistics for you to start with. And then you and I actually got to go do a couple of games last fall when Hampton and Phoebus were in the playoffs.
Right, yeah, we got to go up to Todd Stadium, and you had a great time up there. I really enjoyed my tenure with you, even though it was just 2 games. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I was gifted 2 CDs or DVDs with our performance on them, so we have that for forever now. If we have to look back on it.
We can't lose them. Now, when you were doing all this stuff, when did the Peninsula Pilots come in and you start doing basically you're doing a telecast over the internet? Or explain that, how that works.
The Pilots, of course, are members of the Coastal Plain League, which is a summer collegiate wooden bat league.
Right, right.
One of the finer leagues in the country, and one of the leagues that they have a commissioner who is very forward-looking, and he had put together what's known as the Web Pass system, where each team has to provide a webcaster, essentially a radio announcer over the internet, and you announce the home games. And I had said something to Henry and Hank Morgan about my desire to participate in some of that, and I did a little bit of the PA work when their old PA guy Rodney Gentry was out. I would fill in, and then I got to do the webcast one night, and I found a real home.
Wow, okay.
Because it's rare that you can sit for 3 hours during a day in your own world, because you have a headset on, and just talk about baseball, about the Peninsula Pilots, about life in Hampton, about the peninsula itself. So it's a real opportunity for me to not only see some great baseball, but also to broadcast my love for not only the sports and the Peninsula Pilots, but for the area in general.
Right. Last question, or last thought. What would you say to any of the young student athletes out there of what athletics helps you through your career, even though high school is where you stopped, but you never really stopped being around athletics? What would you say to them?
Well, I'll tell them a story about the practice of law. I'm now at Kaufman and Knowles, which is a rather large firm. We see a lot of candidates for law spots. Seeing a candidate that has a background in athletics tells us that this individual knows how to lose. And I say that because all lawyers lose cases. I'm a trial lawyer by profession. And if you haven't lost a case, you haven't tried one. It's never what you see on TV. But you have to keep going back to it. You can't give up. And a lot of these lessons that come into play when you're a trial lawyer are lessons you learn in sports. Okay. And I have been told there are firms, not ours, but there are firms in this country that require that. When they hire, they look for varsity sports in high school for just that reason. They want these people to know what competition is, to know what hard work is, to be able to look forward and say, if I work or practice today, it's going to benefit me a year from now.
Right.
And to learn how to lose. And I say that not to say we lose cases, we do, but you have to learn how to bounce back, how to handle defeat is just like you need to know how to handle victory.
That's right.
And it's a tough lesson to teach, but sports is the best way to do that.
I appreciate you coming in.
Bob, thanks so much for having me. Come on out and see us at the Pilots.
I will do that. I want to thank you for tuning in to LSC and Sportstime. I want to thank my special guest today, Frank Edgar Jr. I'm your host, Bob Hintz. Until next time.